Okay, so today we would work on something called a tensile test. Okay, and tensile test is probably the most important test related to mechanical, finding the mechanical properties of a material. Okay, if I'm talking about the structural properties uh, or the determination of structural properties through a test, okay, tensile test is probably the most important test that we are talking about because it reveals some of the most important properties. Okay, I would typically ask you about what are those properties, but the kind of answers that I've got in some of my earlier classes, so I will directly answer that. So in the elastic part, you get to know about Young's modulus or the modulus of elasticity. Same thing, which is represented with a E sign and is represented as a ratio of the normal stress to normal strain. And then comes the next most important thing about this: within proportional limit, which is ironical because that relation is the Hookean relation. Okay, we are familiar with, and that itself says that the stress is proportional to strain. Okay, but what is the meaning of that statement? Stress is proportional to strain as long as that is valid. That means proportional limit, okay, which is kind of a self referring statement to make. But that's the way it is. Modulus of elasticity is kind of like that. So within proportional limit, that is valid, and that proportional limit comes before the limit of elasticity or the elastic limit. Okay, so that is the most important property that we get out of a tensile test within the elastic limit. And no, we don't get to know about the other important property. Okay, but we don't get it out of tensile test. Okay, we cannot, because it talks about the lateral contraction under tensile extension. Okay, but we don't measure that, so we don't get that. Okay, so we are not getting this out of the tensile test. Okay, there are means to define, or to get Poisson's ratio. I mean, there are equations like this, like there are relations between shear modulus and you know the modulus of elasticity. Okay, uh, mm, so from there, actually, there are ways to determine the shear modulus, and from there, actually, you can determine the Poisson's ratio. Once you know the Young's modulus and shear modulus, you can determine the Poisson's ratio. It's not directly measured. Okay, uh, okay. So that is number one. Number two, we get to know is that very property called the yield stress. Okay, but I'll put a question mark next to yield stress. Okay, it's because sometimes uh, the determination of yield stress is not unambiguous as you would want it. I mean, not as definite as we would like it. Okay, and because of that, we have to cook up some other way to identify a representative yield stress. Okay, and there comes that representative yield stress, also known as the proof stress. Okay, coming to about all of this in a couple of minutes. But what else do we get? Um, we get the ultimate stress. Okay, and we that is the maximum stress value on the stress strain diagram. So if I actually start plotting the stress strain diagram, So the first part is the elastic part. So the slope of that part is Young's modulus, and that eventually ends at something called the proportional limit. Okay, but the material still remains elastic, so up to certain point. Okay, so if this one is elastic limit, there comes a proportional limit. Then there is an upper yield point. Okay, once you go past that, okay, uh, in today's class we are taking example of mild steel. Okay, and the stress strain curve that I'm trying to draw here is is for mild steel right there. Okay, so there comes an upper yield point, and once you go past that, there is a small dip in the stress value. You are simply trying to extend the strain, and for a moment the stress kind of becomes stationary. Okay, I mean the strain changes but the stress doesn't change. Or if you have to change strain or change stress, you have to have a rapid change in strain. Okay, you get significant, you get practically very tiny resistance in terms of strain. Point being that if you try to get a significant amount of change in stress, you get you get enormous change in strain. So that part is not really very flat. It is kind of up and down zigzag motion. Okay, so that part remains there for a while, and this phase is called yielding. Yielding is when the material starts developing substantial plastic deformation without without having significant change in stress. And then after that, material regains some of its so-called stiffness or hardness, and and the stress again increases further. Okay, this is what the stress strain diagram is likely supposed to be. And essentially, in this part, okay, the tangent is called a tangent modulus. Okay, uh, and uh, and the thing is, this tangent right there, which basically represents this time it's no ratio, it's a differential quantity because it is changing instantaneously. So instantaneous tangent modulus. So this thing is called the tangent modulus. Okay, so this is essentially this part. But as you see, the strain has two parts. One part is an elastic part, the other part is plastic. Okay, and the elastic part is essentially the change in stress to Young's modulus. Okay, and for the plastic part, I can define something called a hardness, which is d sigma d epsilon p, which eventually tells us that this quantity is E times h by E plus h, or h divided by 1 plus h by E. And h by E, h is the hardness that we are talking about. H by E is typically of the order of 10 to the power minus 3. Okay, 10 to the power minus 2, minus 3, whatever. So the point is it is much smaller compared to 1, this ratio right there. This ratio right here is much smaller than 1, which basically means that the tangent modulus is nearly the same magnitude as the hardness itself. Okay, the point being that the majority of deformation beyond the yield point, okay, is your plastic deformation, and this continues for a while, and the material encounters the maximum value of value of the stress in the stress strain diagram. Okay, and then after that point the stress actually decreases. Okay, and eventually the material fractures. So this maximum point is the sigma ut, and this value of stress where it fractures is sigma f, and the strain corresponding to that is epsilon f. Okay, which we discussed in the previous class. That is a measure of ductility. The fracture strain is a measure of ductility. Now, so these are the important properties that we get out of the plastic zone of the stress strain diagram coming from the tensile test. Now, I have a thing to say about the definition of Young's modulus. My experience is, when in the viva I ask you for what is Young's modulus or what is modulus of elasticity, you would be answering simply this: stress by strain. Okay, I'm just quoting the answer that I've got year after year. Stress by strain, not straight dividing strain. Okay, not the ratio of stress to strain. Okay, just stress by strain. It is so incompetent an answer. Okay, so incorrect an answer. Okay, it is so incompetent that it is incorrect. The fact is, Young's modulus essentially represents the constant of proportionality, or maybe even you can define as it the ratio of the normal stress to normal strain. So the type of stress or strain is also important, and that too within proportional limit that needs to be specified. For example, if I ask you what is modulus of rigidity, okay, the other name for shear modulus is modulus of rigidity, okay, or shear modulus. If I ask you that, okay, the most probable answer that I would get is the same one that I got for the Young's modulus. It is a ratio. It is stress by strain. Again, the answer should be it is it's actually the constant of proportionality in the shear stress strain diagram. Okay, or maybe even you can define it as the ratio of the shear stress to shear strain, but again within elastic limit, or sorry, within proportional limit. Okay, and of course within elastic limit. Okay, so so only with that is this definition complete. So these are the different properties that we get out of tensile test. Now I would proceed for going into the details of the test. Okay, and answering a few questions. Okay, so I'll give you the assignment questions right away, and then answering them would be our job while we go through today's class. Okay, so but before going there, okay, I would like to mention this book, Mechanical Metallurgy. I'm sure I have mentioned this earlier, but again I'm mentioning this. This by Dieter, okay, is a must, and you should go through. For today's class, you should go through the chapter titled Tensile Test. Okay, that will give you as much detail as you require. Okay, for understanding what's happening with the tensile test. So the assignment question number 1 is why the material fails at a stress smaller than sigma ut. The point is the material can go up to a stress called sigma ut. Okay, there is a maximum stress, and the material doesn't fail there. Okay, it can reach that stress, but it doesn't fail there, and somehow once it goes per sigma ut, the stress decreases and the material fails at a smaller stress. Okay, I don't know how it sounds to you, But for me, that sounds pretty strange if I didn't know the reason for that. Okay, if I didn't know what could be the logical answer for that. But the question here is the assignment question. Please write it down. Why does the material fail? Why does the material fail at a stress smaller than the ultimate stress? Or in other words, why is sigma F, the fracture stress, smaller than sigma UT? Okay, so that is your first assignment question. I'll let you know if there are any, but that is the first assignment question. Achha. While talking about what are the things that we get out of tensile test, these are the different properties that we get. But in today's experiment, we would also like to get the following quantities. Percentage elongation. Okay. So to summarize, essentially what we would be doing here, we would be having a cylindrical bar, okay, which we would load axially. Okay, that's what we are planning on doing. It's a little complicated than that, but the end result is the same. Okay, and if let's say it starts with an initial length of L0, okay, after the test, okay, it as you can see, the length of it will change. Of course, the shape of the geometry will also change, but I'm not going into that right away. Okay, but the length will definitely change. That's what is the point of doing the tensile test. So that change per unit original length times 100 is your percentage elongation. That actually, the percentage elongation is kind of an indirect measure of ductility of the material. And same thing is percentage reduction in cross section. You see, as the material elongates, its cross section also reduces. Okay, and let's see, if started with a cross section area of A0, uniform cross section area, and it ended up having a minimum cross section of A. So the thing is, not everywhere the cross section will have the same value once it is completely deflected. And actually, today we are going to do a destructive test, which means that the specimen would actually break, and somewhere close to the middle, it will actually undergo something called a necking, which basically means, yeah, I should be drawing it correctly. Which basically means it would become very narrow. And that narrowest portion right there is called the neck. We'll also discuss about how neck happens, okay? But that narrowest portion is called the neck, and the cross section area of that narrowest portion is something of importance to us, just like the the net elongation. So that delta A is this time A0 minus A, because A0 is actually higher than A. So this delta A by A0 times 100 is our percentage reduction in cross section. So these are the main properties, and these are the two additional properties or additional data that we are going to collect out of it. Okay, so I hope you understand your first assignment question, which is, why does the material fail at a stress smaller than the ultimate stress? So is it clear up to this part?
Sir.
স্যার হ্যালো,
Yes.
স্যার বলছি এই যে স্ট্রেস স্ট্রেন কার্ভের এখানে আপার হিল পয়েন্ট আর লোয়ার হিল পয়েন্টের মধ্যে ডিফারেন্স কি, এটা স্যার একটু যদি বলে দেন, বুঝতে পারি না এটা।
it's actually I'm not going, I'm going to answer this a little vaguely. Okay, you see, if uh, plasticity happens, okay, for movement of dislocation within the ductile material. Okay, typically FCC crystal, and there are, octahedral planes in which there are 12 slip systems, and the dislocations move in those 12 slip systems. But these are very technical, and these are very macroscopic, these are very microstructural aspect of plasticity. But the thing is, essentially, plasticity is just like friction. Okay, and if you recall, this is how friction works, right? So let's say you are applying force on a body, trying to move it, okay, and it is resting on a rough surface. It has certain normal forces on it, okay, and the friction force is not always mu s times n. Okay, so you are applying a force and trying to push it, but it is, resisting with this friction force right there. But this friction force is self-adjusting. It will always balance F as long as it can. The limit of the value of F is the absolute value for this is less than equals mu s times n. But within that limit, it can take any value, whichever is required to, counterbalance this force F right here. Okay. So small f simply adjusts itself to capital F and keeps the block in position. Okay. So if I were to plot the deflection of the block, as long as I do not reach mu s times n, okay, so the block is stationary. So this is how the curve happens. The load deflection curve happens. It moves vertically upwards. But the moment the block starts moving, this time you are, the moment, the F reaches this mu s times n, the block would start moving. But as soon as the block starts moving, you are now dealing with the kinetic coefficient of friction, which is actually less than mu s. Okay, and if the block moves, then the force on its small f on it is mu k times n, and this time it's not self-adjusting. It's not less than equal to. It's just simply equal to. It simply equals mu k times n, which basically means this capital F, unless the block is accelerated, it also, equates mu k times n to maintain a motion with constant velocity. Let's say constant velocity. If there is no significant acceleration, this capital F and small f are same, and then that equals mu k times m, which basically means that this force right here would slightly decrease and would become mu k times n. Okay, and it would proceed for a while. And there are certain other things that happens to it. Okay, but this dipping from, reaching a higher value and then having a dip, that is very similar to what we have for plasticity. Plasticity is essentially friction, but within the material. Now, I have been showing you the plot of stress versus total strain, and which kind of looks like this. Okay. And if I were to plot only the stress versus plastic strain, which would be strain minus the elastic part of the strain, which is simply stress divided by Young's modulus. So this part is called the elastic part of the strain. You see, before you reach, the upper yield point, there was no plastic strain. So basically, the curve would be, let's say this is the upper yield point, this point right here. So up to this point, it is, vertically moving upwards. And then once it reaches there, the dislocation start moving, and there is a dip. There is a dip in the stress value. Okay. And of course, in friction, there is something called hardening. So eventually, this again moves upwards. But if you consider it on this part, and if you consider it on this part, can you see the striking similarity right there? The difference between these two curves is just this: I have taken away the elastic part of the strain. I mean, if I were to unload from any stress value right here, the part of the strain that could be recovered. So this was the total strain, and even after removal of complete stress, this could not be recovered. So this part is a plastic strain. So this part is the elastic strain. Okay. So if I take away that elastic part of the strain, which is very simple to calculate because that is simply this stress divided by Young's modulus, because that is the slope of both the lines. So if I take away that part, I have the stress to plastic strain plot. Okay, and at least the initial part of it is very similar to what we have is with surface friction. Plasticity by all means, can be treated as a friction, some sort of internal friction within the material. Okay, is it clear now?
Yeah.
Okay, even if so, if you still do not relate to it, let me tell you, if you think about an electrical circuit, so when a given circuit is open, okay, the voltage difference between the 2 points is actually higher than as soon as the circuit is closed and the electricity starts flowing. So because of the very flow of electricity, the voltage difference slightly reduces. So every time any sort of motion happens, be it motion of the electrons, motion of the dislocations, motion of the block on a frictional surface, there is a dip in the very force that governs the motion, be it what is it called, electromotive force or EMF or voltage, be it frictional force, be it stress in the material. Everywhere the driving force slightly reduces as the motion occurs. Okay, that's what it is. Okay, and of course there are some very deep theories behind it. Okay, but at least in this way we can relate to that. That's the point. Okay, so now proceed for the actual test. Okay, acha. So let's talk about the setup. First of all, we have the specimen, which is known as a dog bone specimen. A dog bone specimen, which looks like this. I'm exaggerating the features. Okay, the thicker regions are not actually as much thick. Okay, but just to sake of representation, I'm doing this. Okay, so imagine this portion is a cylindrical portion. This portion is a cylindrical portion, and then this portion is a conical portion, a taper that is happening right there. Okay. Now, what is the point of making such a specimen? Actually, the specimen would be gripped, okay, at these two locations. So these are called crossheads. Okay. So let's say this one is the fixed crosshead. And this one is the moving crosshead. So they grip onto the two larger diameter portions of the dog bone specimen. Why is it called dog bone specimen? It basically looks like a, a bone that a dog would chase. Okay, so the thing is, earlier we drew a cylinder which would be under tensile loading. That cylinder is this uniform portion, this portion right here, and the length of this portion would be approximately 180 millimeters. Okay, so that is our the region of interest. But why do we make this additional portion? Because that portion needs to be gripped, and by gripping and let's say keeping it fixed from the bottom, you would be pulling it from the top. Okay, now why do we need to make larger diameter for the portions that we are trying to grip? The reason we are trying to make it larger, it's because that whatever happens to the geometry, be it plastic deformation, okay, be it fracture, everything happens in this region of 180 millimeters. Okay, by making the cross section larger at the two ends, we are ensuring that the fracture doesn't happen. We are actually making the central portion weaker. We are deliberately making the central portion the weakest portion. Okay, so that the fracture actually happens in this 180 millimeters and not in the portion that is supposed to be gripped. That's why you make larger diameter right there. Okay, so if you draw the free body diagram of the specimen, there is some tensile force that you are applying, F and F. Okay, but let's say if I delete if I take a free body diagram, if I take a mental section somewhere and then take a free body diagram, so there also F is the force because the object is in equilibrium. Of course, it is elongating, but it is not, accelerated. Okay, it is not moving anywhere. It is being pulled, keeping it in stationary position. So it's in equilibrium. So the two forces must be same. Otherwise, there should be an acceleration, but that's not there. So the point is that you see this diameter is actually larger than this diameter, and the cross section area would also be larger. There, that means that the cross section would be even larger. Okay, so that means the stress on this larger portion is actually smaller. So smaller stress right here than this portion. Okay, and because of that, in this taper region, there is a transition happening. Okay, from that lower stress value to higher stress value. Okay, and actually the stress state over here is three-dimensional. I mean, it's not just sigma xx. If I consider this direction to be x direction, it's not just sigma xx that is there. Okay, and because of that, we cannot take this entire 180 millimeter, okay, for our analysis purpose. Okay, so even in that 180 millimeter, we divide that in three equal components of 60 millimeters, and that central 60 mm is our gauge length small l0, and we would refer to this 180 millimeter as capital L0. Okay, so earlier we defined percentage elongation, that is supposed to be based on capital L. And the strain that we are talking about, that actually is based on the 60 millimeter gauge length. Okay. Next comes how do we measure the strain and how do we measure the stress? Okay. Actually, we do not measure the stress, or neither do we measure the strain. We actually measure the change in length. So we define U as L minus L0. So this U can be measured from a device called extensometer. So we would attach an extensometer. Okay. So you will actually see that in the video, what is an extensometer. We'll come to that in detail. But the extensometer, okay, shows the reading of U. Okay. And here comes our second assignment question. Okay. The question is, what is the purpose of the extensometer having two dials? So the answer to this question would be given in the the video of the experiment. Okay. So while looking at the video, please pay attention to that part that would be discussed in detail. So the question is, why is there are two dials to the extensometer? I mean, if I am trying to get any value of U, one dial should have been good enough. But we take reading from two dials. There are two dials, and we take the reading from two dials. Okay. What is the purpose of that? Okay. So that is your second assignment question. By the way, how the extensometer looks, you will only get to see in the video. The extensometer is a very tiny device. I cannot actually draw it very neatly over here. Okay. So we use a mechanical type extensometer. Okay. So, and about the stress, we don't actually measure the stress. Okay. So there is a difference between what do we measure and what we are trying to calculate. For example, in the flywheel test, we would like to calculate the mass moment of inertia and the radius of gyration. The mass moment of inertia would have a unit of kg meter squared. But what we actually took reading of was certain times, T1 and T2. So the unit for that would be second. Okay. So we could be measuring something else and evaluating something else. Okay. Same thing happens in the tensile test. So let's say in the Viva, I ask you, what did you measure in the tensile test? The answer is not I measured strain and I measured stress, because you cannot. Okay. For example, if I ask you to give me the area of the room that you are in right now, you would not be measuring the area directly. You would be measuring the length and the breadth of the room. And from that, you would be calculating the area. Okay. So there is a difference between what you are measuring and what you are calculating. So, okay. So let's say this fixed crosshead right here. Okay. There is some sensor attached to it, which would show the amount of force. So there is a dial and there is an indicator that shows the amount of force, okay, that you are applying in order to cause so and so deflection. Okay. And you simply divide that force with the original cross-section area, because that is the reading that you have, right? Original cross-section area. You are not, always measuring the diameter as the experiment progresses. Okay. So that only gives you the stress. Okay. So again, in the Viva, the problem that I have seen is, yes, I am okay with you giving me this answer that stress is force per unit area. Okay. And although most of you would be phrasing that is force by area, which I am not okay with. Okay. But when I ask you about the unit of stress, this is a typical answer that I get, that what is the unit of stress? The same answer, force by area. I mean, that's not unit, right? So again, I would ask, what is the unit of stress? Then some of you would be, mentally using the units of force and unit of area, and be answering it is Newton per meter square. But there is no such unit called Newton per meter square. I mean, the Newton per meter square is an expression for the unit, and that unit has a name, and that name is Pascal. Okay. So when I ask you for the third time, I would be getting the answer Pascal. But then I take problem with that unit itself, because how much is a Pascal? A Pascal is a very tiny unit. You can imagine 1 Newton is how much 100 gram of mass weighs, right? 100 gram weight is 1 Newton, because 1 kg force is 9.81 Newton. And imagine that 100 kg force in an area of 1 meter square. 1 meter square is, 10 square feet. Okay. So that huge an area and that tiny a force, that doesn't make any sense. At least for mechanical engineer, that doesn't make any sense. Okay. So a standard unit for stress should be megapascal, which is 1 Newton but per millimeter squared. You know millimeter, right? 10 to the power minus 3 meter, which basically means this is 1 Newton by 10 to the power minus 6 meter squared, or 10 to the power 6 Pascal. That's the reasonable unit for stress. Okay. Achha. So I gave you the assignment question number 2. Okay. And here is your assignment question number 3. What is strength of a material? What is strength of a material? Okay. So the thing is, you had an entire course called strength of materials, either in your curriculum, or in your degree course. Okay. So in your diploma course, you had a subject called strength of materials. Okay. But most of us do not understand what is the strength of a material. Okay. And actually, if I were to talk about the 3 most important properties that we can learn in this course that we are doing, so that would be toughness, strength, and hardness. Okay. So we have already covered toughness in the ISOT impact test. Today we will learn about strength. Can anyone answer which property is actually called the strength of a material?
Toughness.
Sorry?
Toughness.
Roughness.
Toughness.
No, toughness is a different property. Okay. And we define that. But which property can we define as a strength? Toughness talks about how much energy the material can absorb without fracturing. Okay. Think in this way, what would be called strength? So the strength is the load bearing capacity of the material, or the maximum force per unit area that the material can withstand without fracturing. Okay. That is the ultimate stress. And you might recall that sometimes we call it ultimate tensile strength. Okay. Sometimes we call it ultimate tensile strength for a reason, because the property called strength that you are looking for is actually essentially this one. Okay. So next comes the assignment question number 4. Okay. So the assignment question number 4 is why isn't there an why isn't there an ultimate compressive strength? Okay, so all of this you try to answer in the next discussion that you are about to do. Okay, and then we will write
Question
a
number 4 টা আরেকবার বলবেন স্যার?
huh?
Question number 4 টা আরেকবার repeat করবেন?
why isn't there an ultimate compressive strength? Why there is not an ultimate compressive strength?
Okay.
Okay, so in the next part of our discussion we will try to answer that, and after that we would right away proceed for watching the experiment video. Okay, so keep all of this in mind and let's move on to discussion. You see, as the bar elongates, okay, continuously, anytime its length is no longer L0 but U, where U is the instantaneous change, instantaneous value of the elongation. Okay, so and the same thing happens that the area is no longer the same area. Okay, it has changed from A0. Okay, it's no longer A0. Okay, and this the quantity what we defined as stress so far. Okay, so that thing we will call as the engineering stress, which is essentially force by the original cross section area. If you look at this expression, only the force term is changing. You are not taking into account the cross section is changing. So essentially it's not actually a true stress measure. It is not a true stress. Okay, because it is not taking into account that the cross section itself is reducing, the stress would be higher, right? So this is called the engineering stress. This is actually a scaled down version of the force itself. Okay, and similarly the strain we measure is not taking into account that the length is changing, and therefore this is also not a true strain measure. Okay, and essentially this engineering stress strain diagram that we have, okay, is actually, to be frank, a load deflection curve. Is just that the force is divided or normalized with the cross section area, and the deflection is normalized with the original length. Okay, so it is essentially just like the load deflection curve of a spring. Now if we make the correction, I'll draw a simpler stress strain diagram. Earlier stress strain diagram that we drew was in relation to mild steel. Okay, that is very typical of mild steel. Okay, but if I am talking about most ductile materials, okay, let's say aluminum or stainless steel, okay, so there aluminum, copper, etc. So the stress strain diagram would look something like this. Okay, so there is of course this initial linear part, so be careful with the shape. Okay, so the transition is smooth, there is no distinct yield point right there. Okay, acha. So okay, so so the thing is, a true stress measure would look something like this. If this is true, then this is what it is going to look like. Force over, unit current area. So you need to update the area to get the true stress measure. Now, in the similar way, if I want to define the true strain, I can only define the strain as a differential quantity. And that would be at any instant, the differential elongation. You see the elongation is also happening gradually, right? So as the, the extension progresses, so at any, the differential true strain is the differential elongation. You need to understand that du is also dl because L0 is constant. Okay, so divided by the current length, the updated current length, not the original length. So once I integrate this quantity, so I have the true strain once integrated, and this elongation is happening over 0 to, oh sorry, so since du is dl, so the length is changing from L0 to L. So that quantity actually becomes the natural log ln of L by L0. Okay, so ln of L0 plus U by L0, or ln of 1 plus epsilon engineering, this quantity right here. So the correct strain measure would be the logarithm of this part. And as you can see, in the limit epsilon engineering, or in the limit U by L0 tends to 0, the true strain actually is very close to engineering strain. As we know, in the limit epsilon engineering tends to 0, 1 plus ln of 1 plus epsilon, okay, is epsilon, right? So so that way it shows the consistency. Okay, if the strain is not large, the true strain and the engineering strain are very same. And same thing applies to the true stress as well. Okay, if the strain is not huge, A is almost similar to A0, and the true stress is also the engineering stress. Now, I have this declaration: plasticity is assumed to be isoporic, meaning in plasticity, the change in volume, this refers to change in volume, okay, is very small compared to the tensile elongation that it is going through. Okay, so a typical ductile material would fracture at say 15 to 20% of plastic strain, or maybe somewhere between 10 to 20% of plastic strain. A typical ductile material would fracture at that much of tensile strain. The volumetric strain would be much smaller compared to this value, and therefore the material under plastic deformation can be assumed to be incompressible. The material can be thought of incompressible, and plastic deformation can be thought of isoporic, that is volume preserving. So what that basically means is A times L is A0 times L0. Okay, and therefore the true stress is F by A, or force per unit current area, which is F to A0 L0 times L. You see, A would be A0 L0 divided by L, right? So this quantity essentially becomes, if I take only this part, that becomes the engineering stress. And this part right here is, as we discussed earlier, 1 plus epsilon engineering, which basically means this quantity, the true stress, is engineering stress times 1 plus engineering strain. The point being again that in the limit engineering strain tends to 0, the true stress and the engineering stress are very close to one another. Now coming to the point why there is not any compressive ultimate strength, number one, or why does the material fail at a stress okay, at a stress lower than the ultimate stress? When the material can go up to ultimate stress, why does it fail at a smaller stress? The point is that material actually doesn't fail at a smaller stress. Okay, so if I again draw this stress versus strain curve, and whenever you are drawing stress to strain curve, let's say normal stress and normal strain, use the symbols sigma and epsilon, and don't just write in words stress and strain. Okay, that would also lead to deduction of marks. Okay, so you see, this is our engineering stress strain diagram for tensile test. If I were to plot the true stress strain curve, they would be mostly similar in the elastic part. In the plastic parts, they slightly start deviating. Okay, and this continues actually. Okay, and the fracture that we are talking about, that happens somewhere over here. Sorry, actually the strain value would be smaller and the stress value would be higher from these two expressions. So the strain value is slightly smaller, let's say over here. Okay, so that is the actual true stress strain diagram. And the ultimate stress that you are talking about, if I map that in the true stress strain diagram, that would be somewhere else. Okay, as I said, that the true strain is actually smaller than engineering strain, so that maps to an earlier point in the stress strain curve, in the true stress strain diagram. Okay, so material, if we are talking in terms of true stress, doesn't fail at a smaller stress, it obviously fails at a higher stress. The fact is, once you go past the ultimate stress, your cross section reduces so much that it's not the stress value that is reducing, but it's this F value, because this F value is A times true stress, right? So the true stress may still be increasing, but this cross section, the current cross section, which is gradually reducing from A0, it is so much smaller that you ultimately observe the fracture to happen at a smaller F value. But since you are measuring the engineering stress with the original cross section area, so you see, you find that the fracture stress is actually smaller than the ultimate stress. That is not true. And if I want to plot a compressive stress strain diagram and a compressive engineering stress strain diagram, that would kind of look like this. So it is very close to three curves are very close as the strains are close. As you can see, if the strain is small, the stress values are the same. So in the compressive case, what would happen? First of all, this U would be negative, which would mean that this quantity right here, the engineering strain, would be negative. Okay, and therefore the absolute value of the true strain is actually larger. Okay, sorry, I made a mistake probably. The The absolute value of the true strain is, yeah, no. So it actually should go further, right? Oh, no, 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 no. I made a mistake. Yeah. So the actual value of the true strain would be larger. So, okay. So the actual value of the true strain would be larger compared to the engineering strain. I'm talking about the unsigned quantities, the absolute values. The point being, let's say epsilon engineering is 1. Okay, that is -1. In compression, it is -1. Say, if it is -1, then ln of 1 minus 1 would tend to minus infinity. And that would be your true strain. Okay, that means you are able to compress the entire bar, okay, entirely. You are able to compress the bar entirely. Okay, there is no volume left. So in that case, the strain would be infinite. The true strain would be infinite. So if you compare the compressive, so this is compressive engineering stress strain diagram. This is a true stress strain diagram. This is tensile engineering stress strain diagram. So the strain value is actually higher for the true stress strain diagram compared to the compressive stress strain diagram, and stress value is smaller in the true stress strain diagram. But when compared to tensile engineering stress strain diagram, the true stress strain diagram shows lower strain and higher stress. Okay. So again, as you apply compressive force, the cross section area doesn't reduce. From A0 to A, the cross section is simply increasing because you are compressing the bar. And because of that, the engineering stress strain diagram, okay, the true stress strain diagram is same for both the materials. Okay, but since you are still using the original cross section area, and the current cross section area is actually increasing, which only increases the force bearing capacity of the specimen. And since you are measuring the stress with respect to the original cross section area, you see a higher stress when plotting the compressive engineering stress strain diagram. Okay, and because of that, this curve, doesn't go down ever. The true stress strain curve doesn't go down, and the compressive curve actually, kind of shoots to infinity. Okay, the point being, I mean, this is a compressive engineering stress strain diagram. So this kind of, rapidly shoots to infinity. So of course it fractures before that happens, but that's how it looks. Okay, so because of that, there is no ultimate stress point in the stress strain diagram. So here I have tried to answer 2 assignment questions. Okay.
Sir, hello.
Yes.
Due to this homogeneity, there are this kind of difference of true and actual diagram, no? Of material.
I am little surprised with your badge. Actually, I say something else, and you perceive something different at all. Okay, I mean, why did I ever mention homogeneity or anything? The
No,
point is simple. Let me finish. Once again, what I just discussed here. Don't say something and say no. Okay. So the thing is, in one situation, tensile, okay, the cross section is reducing. Okay. Now and in the other situation, the cross section is increasing. But when you are plotting the engineering stress strain diagram, you are not taking into account whether the cross section is increasing or decreasing. You see, the true stress strain diagram on either situation would be identical. That is the purpose of true stress strain diagram. Okay. That is actually the property of the material. And that doesn't depend on whether you are loading it in tension and compression. But let's say in tension, because the cross section is actually reducing, that means once you go past that ultimate stress point, the load bearing capacity, the net load bearing capacity of the specimen, okay, not the material, just the tensile specimen, because it is under tensile loading, it reduces. But you do not recognize that it's the cross section that has reduced, because you are still using, in the engineering stress strain diagram, you are still using the original cross section area, and therefore you perceive it in the engineering stress strain diagram, you perceive it as the falling of the stress, going from ultimate stress to a smaller stress where it fractures. Okay. Since in the compressive case, just the opposite happens, that means the cross section is increasing, and you are not taking into account that actually the cross section is increasing. Since the cross section is increasing, its load bearing capacity only increases more and more. And what you end up getting is a stress strain curve, which even goes above the true stress strain diagram. Okay. Is it clear now?
Okay, sir.
Okay. One more thing I want to add about proof stress. I didn't mention proof stress. You see, for most ductile materials, which are not like mild steel, which are not distinctly showing an yield point, it is very difficult to identify one. And how do you identify it? Yield point is supposed to be the point where the plastic deformation starts, which also means yield point is the highest stress value where the plastic strain is 0. Okay. And the only way you can detect that some stress value which is associated with plastic deformation, if there is certain amount of plastic deformation, okay, however small. So again, I'll just restate what I just said. For the materials which doesn't distinctly show an yield point, we are about to discuss how to determine one, a representative yield point for that. We call it a proof stress. Okay, and this is how we determine it. You see, the yield point is that stress value beyond which the plastic deformation starts. In another way of saying that would be that yield point is the highest stress value without a plastic deformation. Okay. But if I'm talking about a stress value without a plastic deformation, there are so many points. I mean, I could be locating one right here. It's probably well within the elastic limit. And of course, it doesn't have a plastic deformation. But how do I find out that stress value? Okay. Which is the highest stress value without any plastic deformation? The simple answer is I cannot. If I'm talking about absolutely 0 plastic strain, I cannot. Instead, what I can do is I can go for a tiny bit of plastic deformation. How much tiny? 0.002. Okay. That means if the bar is of 1 meter in length, the amount of deflection that we are talking about here is 2 millimeters. Since the bar is 60 millimeters, we are talking about 0.12 millimeter of deflection. Okay, it's not 2%. It's not 0.2. It's 0.2%. Okay, 0.002. So as we know, if I unload from a given stress value, it follows the slope of the elastic part of the curve while unloading. And by the end of the total unloading, I'm left with the plastic strain. I can, reverse engineer that, and without having an unloading to do, simply from the stress strain diagram that I just got, I can think of a line which is parallel to the elastic part of the curve and makes an intercept of 0.2 millimeters, 0.2% of strain, or 0.002 of strain, unitless of course, on the strain axis. So I'm just drawing a line from this point on the x-axis parallel to the elastic part, which would mark a stress value. Okay, which would mark a stress value. Let's call it sigma proof. If I were to unload from sigma proof, instead of going all the way up to sigma f, if I were to unload from sigma, as soon as I reach sigma proof, I would, after unloading, I would have got this much of plastic strain. Now you see, if I make this, this obviously has a non-zero plastic strain. So obviously this stress is slightly higher than yield stress. But the thing is, if I can make this strain, the initial intercept smaller and smaller, in the limit I can reach the yield stress. But I can take it smaller and smaller, but I cannot really take it to be zero, because then I'm left with this entire elastic part of the curve. Okay, any stress value on that, okay, then becomes a representative, and of course that is not true. So what we should be doing is taking a small but finite value of strain on the x-axis and then drawing a line parallel to the elastic part of the curve and marking the intersection on the actual stress strain diagram. So that small yet finite value that we are typically taking is 0.002. Okay, this doesn't mean that this doesn't represent the limits of the elastic part of the stress strain curve. Okay, you see, by the time you reach this sigma proof, the elasticity has ended. You have gone past the actual yield stress value that you can never determine. You have had 0.002 of plastic strain in addition to whatever elastic strain that you have. Okay, so this much would be the elastic strain up to the proof stress. Okay, so it no way represents the limit on the elastic strain. Typically, the elastic strain, the elastic limit rather, would be well within 0.001. Okay, so here we are talking about 0.002, but that is the plastic strain that we are talking about. By the time you reach sigma proof, the total strain would be even higher than that, because there would be elastic strain of the same order of magnitude. You can take, you can say that the total strain by this point would be around 0.003 or something. Okay, so that's what is proof stress. So I believe I answered another question. Yeah, I don't think there are many things for me to add in relation to the theory part of it. Okay, but do go through the book by detail, the chapter on tensile test. That would give you a lot of insight. Okay, and pay your keen attention to the video portion of this lecture, where you'll see the experiment going on. Okay, so let me know if you have any questions so far regarding the discussion we just had.
Let's watch next video.
No, are you are you able to follow everything that has been discussed?
Followed again. I will check later on.
Okay. So maybe you can send me a mail or something. Okay, or you can re-watch the recording. Okay. So today we are going to see the tensile test. Okay. Okay, so can you see the the video thumbnail over here?
Yes.
Are you able to see the video? And can you hear the voice? And today we will be doing tensile test in this instrument. This one is called universal testing machine. If I am already familiar with this machine. Yeah, I just forgot to mention the instrument in which, so this one, not the instrument, but the machine where we would be doing the tensile test is known as universal testing machine. Typically we would be doing tensile tests on different types of universal testing machines. Why are they called universal testing machine? Because you can do a lot of different types of experiments on this one, more than one experiment on this one. For example, in your next semester, okay, you'd be having bending test that we also do in the universal testing machine. So that part I wanted to add. I believe rest of the video should be self-sufficient, and you'll find answers to many of the questions that was asked during the previous part of the lecture. Okay, so watch this video, and once you are done watching this, then we can have a discussion. Perform a bending test over here by putting a beam sort of a structure, simply in a simply supported fashion, and then we can load it over here. So few things about this instrument over here. There is a fixed crossage and there is a moving crossage. So in which the tensile test will be done between these two crosses. So the specimen would be fixed to would be attached to both the fixed crosset and the moving crosset, and then the fixed crosset would remain stationary and the moving crosset would stretch the specimen. So in this case, the specimen is a cylindrical specimen. We'll show you that specimen in a minute. So that can be pulled down using the moving crosset, and thereby the specimen will be under tensile load. And the two important things that we are supposed to measure here is the amount of elongation versus the amount of force applied, or the vice versa. Now this machine is run by a hydraulic system. So you can see all the circuitry over there, and this is the controller. This is where you can control the amount of elongation or amount of loading, and you can also read the data from here. So for example, you can get the reading of how much force that is being applied over here from this dial, okay, and also you can adjust the maximum. So the unit of force is in kilonewton, okay. So right now it has been at is it what the critical 0.5 na 0.5, okay. So that it is the least count, right? So this one is the least count, 0.5 kilonewton, and the maximum value of the force is 100 kilonewton, okay. And this can also be changed using this handle over there. And for example, now it has been changed to 20 kilonewton, the maximum value, and the least count being 0.1 kilonewton, okay. And this one is again another scale with maximum value of 200 kilonewton and the least count being 1 kilonewton. So as you might notice, in this dial there are two pointers, okay. The two pointers, can you put on? So there are two pointers, okay. So the one that is currently moving, the one which was initially stationary, there is used, yeah. So the one that is moving, okay, right now, okay. So that when that moves towards in the clockwise direction, that actually pulls the one that was initially stationary. But then when the moving one moves towards the left, the stationary one becomes the second hand becomes stationary at that location. That means that gives you the maximum value of the force in the entire loading period, okay. And that maximum value actually ultimately gives you the ultimate tensile stress. So there are two hands in the dial. One of them is for showing the instantaneous load value. The other one is for showing the maximum load value in the entire loading cycle. Okay. So now the specimen would be attached, and this is the specimen. This is called a dog bone specimen. It's a cylindrical specimen, okay, and the total total length is about 350 millimeter, okay, and you might notice that the diameter of this part is slightly higher than this part. This one is about 10 millimeters and this one is about 12 millimeters, okay, and this 10 millimeter diameter portion is about 160 to 180 millimeters, okay. So that is kind of the effective length of the specimen, and this these two sides of the specimen which has the higher diameter, that is where the specimen would be held by the fixed and the moving crosshead. Okay, that's where it would be attached. The reason for making the two ends slightly higher diameter is that to ensure that the failure, when the material actually fails, the failure occurs in the central portion where the diameter is the lowest. So as you can see, this portion over here, this one is the lower diameter portion, and this lower diameter portion is our test region, and that, as I mentioned earlier, that is about 160 to 180 millimeters. And the two portions that are inside the two crossheads are that higher diameter portion, and as you may have noticed earlier, there is a taper between the higher diameter and the lower diameter. That actually is there for in order to avoid any amount of stress concentration. And the reason for making the higher diameter portions at the two ends is because we want to have, since this one is our test region, we want to have any type of activity, including any change in the shape or any fracture happening within this test region. And the way to ensure that is that this remains the lowest diameter region. This is uniform, of course, with a certain amount of approximation, but that is the lowest diameter in the entire segment. And this instrument over here, this is an extensometer. Okay, this is a spring-loaded extensometer, mechanical type. So so the way it is attached to the specimen is by by pulling it. So it is spring-loaded. You can make the gap higher by pushing it. Okay, and then we would place the specimen in the gap between these two. So these two rods are over there to ensure the gauge length. The gauge length is the gap between this knife edges, this knife edge. I hope you can see this one, the small knife edge over here, and this knife edge over here. And that gap in this case is 60 millimeters. And of course, you can move these two knife edges higher and make any different gauge length. But for this one, we have set it to be 60 millimeters. So 60 millimeters is our gauge length. Now I have mentioned three lengths. One is the total length of the specimen, that is about 350 millimeters. Okay, and this effective length, which is the 10 millimeter diameter portion, and in that 10 millimeter diameter portion also, we are only taking a very small segment of 60 millimeters. Now, reason for doing that would be that from the higher diameter, that is the 12 millimeter diameter portion to 10 millimeter diameter portion, there is a taper region, and in that the stress state becomes three-dimensional. Okay, and it needs to have a smooth transition from three-dimensional to one-dimensional stress state. And actually, the test that we are doing, okay, that is suitable for uniaxial stress state. So we are doing an analysis with uniaxial stress state. To ensure uniaxial stress state happens in the region of the bar, we are supposed to take 1/3 of the total length. Now the total length is about 180 millimeters, around 160 to 180 millimeters. So we will be taking only 1/3 of that length in the middle of the rod, which would be around 60 millimeters, and that's why we attach the extensometer. The least count for the extensometer, you might notice, is 0.01 millimeter. Okay. Now how does the extensometer work? You see, when this one being spring loaded, when we attach the extensometer to the specimen, these two knife edges are actually in static friction with the surface of the surface of this rod or the dog bone specimen. And as the dog bone specimen elongates, the gap between these two knife edges also elongate. And how does that happen? You see, as this knife edge is these two lower knife edges, as they go down, okay, as the moving process pulls the bar, the lower knife edges go down, and as they do so, they would push the reading on these two dials. Okay, they would push under these two these two dials. So therefore you will see the reading of the elongation from this dial. Okay, and that's how the elongation is measured. Okay, and okay, so the thing is, so why do we need two dials over here? The thing is, it's a possibility that even with the extensometer attached to the bar, okay, one of the knife edges might lose contact, might not be in static friction with the might be in contact but not in static friction with the bar itself. Okay, and some slip may occur, and because of that slip, okay, one of the dials, and we do not know which one, okay, would not probably give you the correct result. Okay, of course there is a chance of both of them not giving you correct result. But then in order for this to be attached to the bar, which is only by means of friction, okay, one of the knife edges must work. Okay, so there is a possibility that both of them would show you correct result, or at least one of them would show you more or less the correct result. So while reading the data, if let's say one of them tells you it is 0.5 millimeter of elongation, the other one tells you 0.48 millimeter, then we can take the average of that. But if one tells you that it's a 0.5 millimeter of elongation, the other one tells you it is 0.25, you are supposed to ignore the smaller value. Okay, that's how we work with the extensometer. Now this extensometer will be attached to this rod over here. Okay, and then this this moving crosshead would be pulled downwards, and it would in a way stretch this bar over here, and therefore we would get the elongation data from the extensometer. Okay, and similarly we will get the value of the force from this dial over here. Not only that, here we would be actually plotting a graph. Okay, so as the loading happens, we would also be generating a graph. So the y-axis is basically the load in kilonewton. You see the maximum value is 100 kilonewton, and the x-axis, so it would be rolling in this way. So the x-axis would be your elongation. Okay, so the load versus deflection curve we will also generate from this through this graph as well. So now we'll attach the extensometer. So right now what we just did was we adjusted the current reading of the extensometer to 0 for both the dials. Okay. So we get the measurement from 0 itself. Otherwise we would have to subtract. Okay. Now the extensometer will be attached to the specimen. Okay. So here I have the instruction sheet and the specifications of the test have already been written down over here. So, so first thing is the full length of the rod that I just mentioned, there is about 350 millimeters. And then the effective length, we already discussed what that is. That is the region with the 10 millimeter diameter. So diameter is not exactly 10 millimeters. So you can see we have taken reading at 3 different sections, okay, at 3 different heights and 3 different angular orientation. And from that we are taking an average. And here we have listed down the extensometer gauge length. Now so many lengths are there, and I just tell you that which one is important when. When we would be measuring the strain, because you see the uniaxial stress state is only there in the 1/3 of the total effective length, okay, which is 165 millimeters. So in that 1/3, that is the 60 millimeter gauge length, is where we would measure the strain. So this, so the deformation that you would note over here on these 2 extensometer dials are the deformations over that gauge length. So essentially, in order to measure the strain, you would simply divide that value, that extension, with the gauge length, which is 60 millimeters, to get the value of the strain. Now there are some specifications with regard to the machine that we are working on, which is an universal testing machine, maximum capacity of 200 kilonewton, which we just showed you, and then these are the specification of the extensometer. So the range of working of the extensometer is 0 to 5 millimeter. Okay, so so once the deformation goes beyond 5 millimeter or tends to go beyond that value, you cannot use this extensometer, and the least count is 0.01 millimeter. Now there are some other details over there. So these specifications must be there in your instruction sheet. Then we will be taking the reading. Okay, so this is there are some discussions over here, some of the experiment steps that are mentioned over here, and here are the procedures. Okay, and there would be some questions for you to answer in the end. But before that, this is the segment where you take the experimental data. While doing the experiment, you are supposed to note down the data over here, and from that that data you are supposed to calculate various things. For example, the value of the load, that is the actual force in kilonewton while you reach the yield point, or what is the maximum value of the load, and other things. And from that you will calculate the stress value at the yield point, the ultimate stress value, that is the maximum load divided by the cross-section area, percentage elongation, and several other things. So here you see, one important information is mentioned, which is percentage elongation. Percentage elongation is a measurement of the ductility of a material, given material. What does that mean is the length before elongation Okay, and comparison between length before elongation and length after elongation. Okay, so the percentage increase in the total length. Now you see, once this specimen is loaded and then gradually to extend, and after certain value of stress it would actually break. So this is a destructive test. Okay, and so once the broken pieces are assembled, okay, we can measure what is the total change length. Now this total change length would not be measured about the full length. It would be, it's not about 350 millimeters. It would be based on the effective length. You see that the higher diameter portion, the 12 millimeter higher diameter portion, which is inside the two crossets, that barely extends beyond the elastic point. But in the middle region, which is 10 millimeter diameter, that has substantial amount of plastic deformation, and that's where we want to focus. So when we will be measuring the percentage elongation, that is based on your effective length. And that is also not based on your extensometer gauge length. So the extensometer gauge length is there for measurement of the strain, but for the measurement of the percentage elongation, we will be using the effective length. Okay, so here we have already preset some of the load values. Okay, because we already have the load data from the dial over there, so we can directly note the corresponding reading of the extensometer, left and right, and eventually taking the averages. Okay, and ultimately here at these columns are for you to do the calculations. Okay, the stresses, strains, and ultimately calculation of the Young's modulus from the the ratio of the stresses and strains, and then average Young's modulus, and so on. Several calculations are there. But one more thing. As I mentioned earlier, the working length of this extensometer is up to 5 millimeters. From 0 to 5 millimeters of elongation, we can use this extensometer. Now, as you might know, that the material has substantial elongation in the plastic region. Let's say if you are testing a ductile material, and then in the plastic region, it will have several times higher elongation than in the elastic region. Okay. And when does the plastic region starts, or when does the plastic deformation starts? It starts beyond the yield point. Now, what is an yield point? An yield point is a stress value at which with smaller increase in stress, there is a substantial increase in strain, or the gradient of the stress or the rate of stress is much smaller. So the stress strain diagram is kind of flat in the yield point. So there is the Hookean part, which is a linear part, then it becomes becomes flat for a small domain, and after that it starts developing stresses forward. So the first region is the elastic region, then comes the yield point, and then comes your hardening region. Hardening is the region where the material regains its original stiffness. Okay, so the material is most stiff in its elastic region, and the stiffness kind of momentarily, I shouldn't be using the temporal term, it becomes the slope becomes flat at the vicinity of the yield point, and after that it again regains some of its stiffness, and that is the hardening portion where the curve again increases, the stress again increases. So now the thing is, we don't want our extensometer, which is a very delicate instrument, we do not want it to be subjected to plastic deformation. So so we only want to use this extensometer up to the yield point. So this instrument is there only for measuring the elastic strain. And once we know we have hit the yield point, we will remove the extensometer, and beyond yield point, we are not taking any measurement of the strain. We cannot, because we have already removed the extensometer. But we can still have the load be recorded from the dial, and therefore we can get the yield point or maximum load value or the break load. Again, what is the maximum load? We have shown two hands in the dial that gives you the force value. One that gives you the instantaneous load value, the other one gives you the maximum load value across the entire loading cycle. So that maximum load value is what you are supposed to write here. This says maximum load, and from that you are supposed to calculate the ultimate strength. And then at the breaking point also, that means when the material fractures, so the final stress value is the breaking point. So that you are also supposed to note. Okay, so that's with the extensometer, that's with the instruction sheet over here, and now we can directly proceed for the experiment.
2.5.
1.
5.
3, 2.
7.5.
4, 3.
10.
5, 4.
12.5.
5.5. 4, 5.
15.
7, 5.
17.5.
8, 6.
20.
9, 8.
22.5.
10, 9.
25.
11, 9.5.
27.5.
12.
ঘুরে যাচ্ছে, ঘুরে গেলে বলবে হিল করে গেছে। 2750।
12, 10. তোমরা খুলে নিচ্ছি।
দাদা খুলো না, খুলো না, একটু দাঁড়াও।
হ্যাঁ, এই যে রান করছে, হ্যাঁ, এইটা
হ্যাঁ, এই করে গেছে।
এই যে করছে, ঘুরছে।
এইখানটা এখানে তুলে কিন্তু
ঠিক আছে, এবার ওইটা তুলবে।
So right now we have reached the yield point, and as we can see, we are developing rapid extension for the
Yield point.
So what we are doing is we are doing the extension. Beyond this point, we will not be attaching the extension. So the yield point value is 27.5 kilonewton. So from that you are supposed to calculate the stress.
কাটাই দেখলাম।
And this is what is marked as the yield point, where the curve has momentarily become flat. And now it is going for the maximum stress value or the maximum load value.
ভাঙছে, ভাঙছে, ভাঙছে।
So the maximum load value is
37।
37.
না 37 কি করে? 30, 35, 35,
36.
1 করে
36.
1, 36,
36 kilometer. And the braking load is
3250।
So this is where we have reached the maximum load value, okay? And after that, the spontaneously the material goes for failure, okay? As we apply more and more elongation, the load for doesn't increase further and decreases from this point and ultimately causes a fracture. Now this load, this is where the fracture happened. This jerk shape happened where the fracture happened, and after that the load obviously becomes zero because there is the material has already broken and it cannot sustain any further load. is the broken specimen. Okay, and as you can see, it forms the famous cup and cone shape. So this one is a cone, and there you can see this hollow cup forming inside inside this rod. Okay, ideally the necking should happen in the middle of the specimen. Now, what is necking? While we are continuously loading beyond the maximum load value or the ultimate stress value, somewhere within the along the length of the rod, that means that this uniform 10 millimeter diameter portion, somewhere we are supposed to see the rapid reduction in the cross section. Obviously, because of the elastic and plastic deformation, cross section was gradually reducing, but somewhere we would see rapid reduction and eventually leading to failure. Okay. Now, the amount of reduction in the cross section is actually an indication of the ductility of the material. If the material is perfectly ductile, this portion would actually end at a point. But as you can see, it has not. So this has certain amount of brittleness into it. Also, one more problem. Ideally, if we do, let's say, a finite element simulation in ANSYS or Abacus, there you would see that that region where the cross section reduces to minimum, that happens exactly in middle of the rod. Okay, but in this case, as you can see, it has happened at a end. Okay, actually closer to the taper region. Okay, so it's still in the 10 millimeter diameter region, but closer to one of the ends. Okay, so this has happened obviously because it's not perfectly cylinder, it's not uniform everywhere, because you see it has been prepared through turning, and in turning usually the middle region has the higher diameter. So in this case what we have obtained is the maximum load we have obtained is around 55.5 kilonewton. Okay, so it has gone past 50 and then 10 marks, that is 50.55 and then another mark, so 11 marks. So 55.5 kilonewton is the maximum load, and from the cross section area you can find out what would be the ultimate tensile strength. Okay, so so the breaking point was around 32.5 kilonewton, and we have written down the information after the experiment. For example, the length after breaking is 194 millimeter. You might recall the original length was 165 millimeter, and after breaking the length has become 194 millimeter. Okay. So what length are we talking about? We are talking about the effective length, the length of the 10 millimeter portion. Okay. So that has changed from 165 to 194, and from that you can figure out how much is the percentage elongation. Both percentage elongation and the reduction in cross section is a measurement of the ductility of the material. The more the material is ductile, the higher will be the reduction in the cross section, and higher will be the change in the length. Okay. And also we have generated this graph, okay, that shows you the value of the load versus the elongation. Okay. So that is there, and we have this broken specimen over here, and this is your instruction sheet over there. So we have written down all the data that you require, and on this side we have noted down the values of the different deflections from the load. So there are two columns. So in one of them we have noted down the left dial of the extensometer, on the other one the right dial, and this way we got the elongations within the elastic limit. And as soon as we encountered 27.5 kilonewton, we realized that we have hit the yield point. Yield point is where the extensometer dials show rapid change in the reading, although the load is only gradually changing. So that this flat region in the curve, is manifested when we are doing the experiment. That flat region is manifested through such behavior. So that point is known as the yield point. And after that, we have noted down the maximum load and also the breaking load. Okay, so oh, some of you have already left. Okay, that's fine. It's up to you. But the questions that were asked before the class are most of them answered after watching this video. নাকি কেউই বুঝতে পারোনি কিছু ভিডিও দেখে? কোশ্চেন গুলো কি সেগুলো খেয়াল নেই নাকি?
না স্যার, বুঝতে পেরেছি।
ওকে, তো আমি তো যথারীতি আজকে ভিডিওটা আপলোড করে দেবো, so you can watch it over YouTube, and I'll also share the link for submitting the report. Okay, so that also you can do, and I believe most of the questions have been either answered in the the lecture session and or in the experimental part. So I believe there shouldn't be any issue regarding the preparation of the report. Also, did you notice when the extensometer was removed? The extensometer was removed right after the yield point was reached. But did you notice how did we identify the yield point has been reached? It's when the dial starts showing rapid change in strain. That means if you're gradually increasing the force, suddenly there is rapid change in elongation. Okay. So that represents the flat region of the stress strain curve, that kinky flat region. So that's how we identify there is yielding happening, and that's when we remove the extensometer. Okay, and while we were shooting all these videos in the month of February, so I particularly requested the videographer to make that slow motion video. I mean, I took another new specimen, and we put a new specimen there and took that slow motion video, so you can see how the necking happens, how enormous plastic deformation eventually calls for a region where there is rapid plastic growth and eventual result into rapid reduction in cross section. So I hope all of our effort that we put in into teaching you something, okay, doesn't go to waste. So I hope you'd be doing justice to it. Okay, so unless you have any other questions, we'll stop here, and next time we would probably meet over a Viva session. So let me know if you have any other questions. Do you have any question?
No, sir.